Welcome, everyone, to the Friday night live stream of Signals from Mars. It is October. Holy shit. I was trying to not mess
Haha.
the date up. April 28th. Jesus. It was the first live stream of the month, actually. And we're kicking it off with a bang. Today's subject is Sunset Strip hard rock and metal, and at the end of the day it's going to be bands that are influenced by the Sunset Strip more than anything. um this can go a lot of different ways, and I was talking to Jeremy about this off air, where there's some bands that could have been here but maybe weren't voted on this list because people don't associate them so much with this kind of a hard rock or metal. You know, people like to call it glam rock or hair metal or glam metal or pop metal, as Ed calls it. Um, but I think there's a lot of big influential bands that during the 80s did take a turn towards this style of music. So we'll talk about it as we go on. But anyway, 42 bands were voted on. We got the majority of the people to vote. We got what, about 90% to vote. So that's cool. We have joining me who I did not introduce, which I'm doing them all a disservice. Some of my great friends and Patreon patrons and diehards of the show. We have Metal Dan out in California. We have Johan in Sweden. And although he may look Sunset Strip tonight, let's not fool anyone. Jeremy is in a Sunset Strip state of mind, but he is he is somewhere in England. Some people would ask him, or maybe he would ask, you know where you are. Well, you're here on Signals from Mars. That's where you are. Anyway, so 42 bands. Let's do these in blocks, and as usual, we'll take our time as we get closer to the top. So, at number 42, we have Treat out of Sweden. 41, we have Nitro. 40, we have Europe. 39, we have Icon. 38, Mr. Big. 37, Love Hate. 36, Keel. 35, Dangerous Toys. Um, Anyone want to mention anything real quickly about any of those bands? And just a reminder, when we do these lists, um, we have to, for bands to be rated higher, people have to coincide with the voting. And it's interesting because, I mean, I know who people voted on, but it also is influenced by where we grew up, I think, and where we started listening to this music, because some bands were huge in some areas, some were not. Um, Johan, for example, always talks about Icon. Icon is a band out of Arizona, which
Mm.
was which was huge in Sweden, from what he's told us. In the U.S., they were kind of known. I think that they're known more for providing Sammy Hagar with some of his solo band members more than anything in the U.S. anyway. But Johan has always talked about how big an impact the band was, especially their first two albums in Sweden. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Good, Victor. I'd like to say a thing or two about Icon, The Night of the Crime, the album. It's a fantastic album. If you haven't heard it, it's great US AOR, mid 80s, good songs, great. I mean, it's an album that should have gotten more attention than what it did. And The second album, I'd like to say something about is Treat. Is Scratch and Bite, Treat's first album. Uh, that's better than Icon. That's a Swedish classic album, and I totally recommend everyone who hasn't heard it to check it out on the streaming services. So yeah, that's it. Those two bands, great bands. Thank you.
Okay.
I didn't know that Icon was bigger in Sweden than the U.S. They here in California they made a dent. They were more of a cult band,
Right.
and that we those of us that knew kind of how cool they were, but they didn't make it to the radio much over here. And the album was great. We didn't understand why it wasn't getting much, and they just fizzled out. So that's interesting. And then Keel, Ron Keel. Luckily, I grew up in California, so I could go see Keel all the time from little clubs, 200 people or whatever, and they managed to make it all the way up to large venues. So it was just cool to see the rise and fall and the ins and outs of Ron Keel in the area. That was awesome.
Mm.
Yeah, Keel were really big in the UK as well. I was really into them at the time. The Right to Rock album was really good. I sort of saw them as quite a big band at the time.
Awesome. All right, give a let's go over the next few. All right. So at 34 we have Honeymoon Suite, 33 Lizzie Borden, 32 Hurricane, 31 Black and Blue, 30 Inve Malmsteen, 29 Whitesnake, 28 Skid Row, 27 Racer X, 26 Dio, and at 25 Cinderella. Anything you guys want to mention about any of these bands?
Yeah, Cinderella, what a great band. I mean, I had the song, the album. What's the one? Is it Night
Night
Songs?
Songs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got a greatest hits album by them now, and I still play it quite a lot. I really like a lot of their stuff. It's, I think it's worn well, and I think they should have been a bigger band than they were.
I've heard people say that the name is what held them back. That if they would have chosen a different name, that kind of pigeonholed them to, the difference between them becoming the Black Crows to them being continuously compared to Poison and Warrant.
I just had that discussion with my wife a week or two ago, and because we were talking about this show, and I told her, because you gotta have something to talk about, 20 plus years marriage. So I told her about Victor and what this shit is, and she wanted to get in, so she's probably gonna join, which is cool. But so I was saying Cinderella, I said it's a stupid name for a band, and she didn't understand me. I said it's Disney, and she goes, well, it's not Disney. She knows more than I do,
Right.
but she says the name's fine. I'm like, no, it's a stupid name for a band. So and now you say the same thing. So she's not here right now to. Now I gotta tell her. See, I told you. So that's,
I think the album Night Songs really kicks ass. That to me, by far, that's the best thing they ever released. I think it's better than any of the other releases. That's just my opinion, but that's because it borders a lot more on the heavier side of things. It's closer to AC/DC than it is the Black Crows, for example, where there wasn't the piano ballads and stuff like that they later went on and did, and it was more in the vein of what I enjoyed.
they destroyed their own band from internally. They rose up. I saw them at a little venue when they first started out, and headlining at a small club here in California, and then they made it all the way up to 2 nights in a row at Long Beach Arena, a big thing. And I think the sound was great. The name held them back, and they had internal fighting that they
Yeah.
could have lived on as a legacy or whatever, but they chose not to do that. And I find it interesting. I'm reading John Karabi's book right now, and he mentions the rise of Cinderella
Right.
in the East Coast area, which I didn't know anything about. All I knew is they showed up here with night songs. They played, then they headlined a club here with Black and Blue opening up, and it was awesome. So we totally loved it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Karabi had to know those guys from way back when, because they're all from Philadelphia, South Jersey area. So he knew about them way before anyone else did. Um, so I mean, yeah, that's the internal fighting had to do a lot with that, and it's a shame because there's a pro wrestler, Mark Henry, always says, give people their flowers when they're still here. Don't wait until they're gone. And Cinderella, after Jeff LeBar died, started seeing, Tom Kiefer saying stuff about him and this and that. And it was like, dude, this is shit you should have said to his face so many years ago. This isn't stuff you should hold on to until somebody's gone to, hey, we should have reconciled, or we should have, yeah, okay. Kind of late now. But anyway. Um let's see. Go ahead, Johan.
Yeah, totally agree about Cinderella. Great album. My vote were for Yngwie Malmsteen, Marching Out.
Mm-hmm.
Great album. Came out, I don't know, 86, I guess. Perhaps not this part of the scene, I don't know, but for me it was, and I think that was a great album. And I thought it would be higher on the list. So I don't know what you guys think about that album, Marching Out, the first album with, real lyrics and vocals, and yeah.
We played the crap out of that album when it came out. It was huge. It in Rising Force, it just didn't stick around, probably because of Ingve's attitude. Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I mean, I think that Yngwie could have been a lot better if he'd had, kept on making great songs rather than just twiddling and whittling and, playing for himself, which is what he does. I mean, he's an absolute genius on the guitar, but, it's not great to listen to all the time. But, in the 80s when he was releasing those albums, yeah, he was brilliant. And, there were some great songs on those albums, and he deserves to be in the list for sure.
Yeah, I think Odyssey was probably his biggest album in the US, and it also is probably the closest to being commercial, because you had Heaven Tonight on that, you had Jolene Turner on it. And I always thought, had he have kept Jolene Turner in the band, had they put out 2 or 3 other albums, would he have become a bigger name? Would we? Yeah, I don't think anyone confuses his virtuosity. But is Yngwie held in the same esteem as, say, a Michael Schenker? I don't believe he is. And part of it is attitude, part of his songs. There's a few things there.
What do you compare with Michael Schenker?
Yeah.
That Yngwie is not as great a player?
No. Popularity wise, in the sense that Michael Schenker, all these years later, is still in the press. Still, when he releases an album, the videos get promoted a lot. The last few things that Yngwie has put out, and not even the last few things, for a considerably long time.
Yeah,
his releases haven't gotten a lot of.
No, that's true, Victor. He's made. I think that Yngwie has made bad decisions the last, I don't know, 15 years or so. I mean, he's the master of bad decision. I mean.
Yeah, I mean he's a very narcissistic player, isn't he? I mean he plays for himself. Yeah. We know the ability he's got, but he just can't translate that into what the masses want. He's massive in Japan, but then in Japan they like everything played at 180 miles an hour, and so that's why he's popular there.
All right, his last quote unquote big release, which was his next to last album on Mercury was Eclipse. That came out in 1990.
Whoa.
So that's 33 years ago. I mean, he put
I
out,
thought Metallica was lazy.
but I mean, since then he's released a lot of stuff. It's just a lot of people don't know about it. Look at that. And I'm now starting to
Mm.
see that some of the stuff isn't even on Apple Music anymore. Wow. Okay.
But the problem is it's just so samey. I mean, you can put on any of those, probably the more recent albums, and you're going to hear a classical piece, a suite number in D minor, and it'll sound exactly the same as the one on the previous one. It'll just be played at 180 miles an hour, and it'll be brilliant. You know, it'll be perfect. But it's not something you want to hear on every single release.
Yeah. All right. Let's move.
Well,
There you go.
real quick for Lizzie Borden, I did my list by albums, and I did "Love You to Pieces" because we used to play that album all the time growing up, and I can still listen to it to today. And as dumb as the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is, and unrecognizing people, to me, Lizzie Borden is a master. He created great songs, great anthems, and is a good songwriter. And I think he doesn't get enough credit for that. He never will. But I think he's great.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's my fault that I'm not mentioning the albums. I it was funny when I was putting this together. I thought about when we did the new wave of British heavy metal and the thrash lists, and I thought, this kind of isn't going to work with the album premise. So I shouldn't have asked you guys to include albums just because it comes down to three Motley Crue albums being voted on, four Dokken albums being voted on, one Guns N' Roses album being voted on. So we, if I would have done this by album in the end, we would have had 100 and something albums and three to four by every band. So that's why I'm just going with the names. So I guess live and learn. But cool. I'm glad that you have the album there and that you mentioned that. So, all right. 24 Warrant. 23 Stand Up Metal Dan. Kicks. 22 Faster Pussycat. 21 Armored Saint. 20 Aerosmith. 19 LA Guns. 18 Poison. 17 David Lee Roth. And 16 Y&T. So any comments on those? Go ahead, Johan.
Yeah, Kicks isn't a big band here in Sweden, although they played at Sweden Rock Festival. But I, in my youth, had the Midnight Dynamite record,
Right. Mm-hmm.
and I think that's a great record. I don't know what you guys think about that record, but that's a good record. So yeah.
Yeah, and they reissued.
Yeah.
They reissued that album, cleaned up the vocals, cleaned up the lyrics. You can understand Steve a little better, and to me that's a reissue that's brighter and better than the original.
Yeah, I would say they're the biggest era of the band is Midnight Dynamite, Blow My Fuse, and Hot Wire. Those are probably their. Am I correct by saying that, Dan?
Yeah, in my opinion, and it was mostly always about the live show. The live show's incredible. They're playing this week on Monsters of Rock Cruise, and they're dying. They're fading before my eyes, and I'm kind of sad about it. They're not the same band they used to be. I just saw a Cool Kids video the other night, and God, they look so young. And there's nothing wrong with us getting old, but there's two original members kind of left now, and they just don't have that look anymore. I'm not counting them out yet, but damn, the end is coming. I can just see it, unfortunately.
Yeah. that's something that we could probably attach to a lot of bands. Jeremy, anything you want to mention?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could certainly attach it to Aerosmith, and Permanent Vacation came out in the '80s, and to me, it was an absolute game changer. And I still listen to that album. I've just recently bought a secondhand vinyl copy of it after having previously just had it on CD. And obviously I'm an Aerosmith fan, but when you listen to that album and you realize how they clean themselves up and they produced some pretty crappy stuff beforehand, and then they suddenly came out with this album and it had hit songs on it, it had hit singles, it had rocky numbers on, it had a cover of a Beatles song on it, had everything on it. And I just thought that they really they came back in everyone's faces, and I thought they produced some good stuff. I always think that Aerosmith really rock. You just have to really turn them up and have a good listen to them, and I think they're a great band.
Yeah, and then Y&T. Speaking of them, you're on your list. They're down to just Dave now. They're going to be playing a show here in California coming up. I'm going to go check that out. And I don't know what kind of shape Dave's in anymore, but I'm glad that they are on the list. They're one of the first bands that I ever saw live, and truly appreciated their music over the time.
Yeah, they're a great band, Y&T. I mean, I second that. I mean, I've seen them live. I used to get the albums when they came out, and Mean Streak is just a superb album. I mean, there's not a bad song on it. Still sounds great today. Really good.
Yeah, even their last album, Face Melter, I thought was really good. It was, one of these things where when we have bands that we love that have been around for so long, and you're like, I'd wish they just put out one more that just hits the nail right on the head, and Face Melter did that. After that, it was like, kind of, for me anyway, it was like, shit, do they have any more of this left in the tank? Can we get an album or two more like this? But yeah, I agree with you guys. I want to say a quick hello to Jose in the chat. Hope you and the family are doing well. And all right. Anyone else want to say something else before we move on here for 15 through 11? All right. At 15, we have Warrior. At 14, we have Bon Jovi. 13, I have to say 13, 12, and 11 surprised me because I did not expect these bands to be that high. At 13 is Rough Cut. At number 12 is XYZ. And at 11, band is about to put out a new album. I've posted some videos on Patreon. At 11, it is Winger. So, anything you guys want to mention there? To be honest, I thought Bon Jovi would easily be in the top 10. But didn't happen.
Well, I mean, Bon Jovi in their heyday were just amazing. I mean, they were one of the greatest bands that I got into at the time. And obviously they're producing absolute dire garbage now, and they're a terrible band. But then they were amazing, and the hit singles that they came out with. I mean, we all know them. Everybody sings them. They're ubiquitous, and you can hear them in a bar or a restaurant, and you'll sing along to it in your head. And that's just a great band. They produced 2 or 3 superb albums at the time, and I really like them. Thought they were great.
You mean you sing In and Out of Love at the top of your lungs in the bar?
Not that one.
Hello to Tony in Barcelona tonight. Hope you're doing well. He says Rough Cut rules.
Yeah, they They released the Rough Cut 3. I purchased it on CD from them direct. It's okay. It has some good songs, so they're still around. They were on the cruise the last time, and I ran into them in the bathroom, which was like, well, I guess everybody has to pee eventually. So it's cool that they made the list.
Johan, any band you want to mention?
I don't know, but Bon Jovi, the album 7,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
That's a great album.
See
To
that,
me.
Jeremy? Somebody appreciates it.
I wore that cassette out crazily back in the day. Would listen to it all the time. Yeah, before the big one came out.
Yeah, I think I did too. To be fair, yeah.
They want nothing to do with those first two albums. It is just ridiculous. And growing up in New Jersey or anywhere in the New York area, you are guaranteed to hear Runaway every single day on the radio. In and Out of Love, you'll hear once a week on a New York station. Jersey stations play it at least once a day. And then all the hits get played every day. So,
Well, I think that's that's the album that was still a secret. I mean, the album after that became everyone knows what happened after that, but that album they were still here, at least in Sweden. They were just a hard rock band, and the songs were good. So I like that album. What's the name of Tokyo Japanese
Tokyo Road?
Yeah, yes.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I know. Great song. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because a few years back, more than a few years back, they started coming out saying, "Oh, we were never a hard rock band." It's like, okay, so you were dressing up in all the leather and tiger prints and had, your hair all poofed out, and you weren't a country rock band back then.
I love to hear when the stories of Victor telling his kids that enough, you've played that song too many times. I'm surprised my parents didn't do the same thing when I played Runaway constantly over and over in loop.
Yeah, no, they're better with that nowadays. At least the last month or so, it's starting to sink in.
Also on your list is Warrior. That's cool that it made it so high. I got to see Warrior. They opened up for Maiden one time in California, and I classify Warrior as one of those Bob Nalbandian bands. You'd always talk about them.
Yeah, Joe Floyd had a lot to do with Bob's stuff. A lot of the documentaries, so part of Warrior, definitely. All right, so far, any band that surprised you guys that isn't in the top 10?
Oh, top 10.
Top 10. Yeah. We don't know yet.
No, but is there any band that I've mentioned already that you guys are surprised that they've already appeared and are not in the top 10?
Yeah, I guess Bon Jovi might be one. I was surprised Whitesnake were a bit lower, but then I think that not everybody would pick them out as a sort of, an American style Sunset Strip sort of 80s hard rock band. They were, a lot of people in the UK remember them as a bluesy outfit originally. I would have picked maybe Y&T in the top 10, but then I guess not everybody might have thought of them.
Yeah, the other thing also, Jeremy, you touched upon something when describing Bon Jovi, which affected me when I did my list, was how much I loved certain of these albums or certain of these bands, and just thinking, wow, they've just been putting out shit for 20 plus years now. Do I really like this band as much as I used to think I liked them? There's there's some of that. And then I couldn't help but think, and I'll mention this later on because I don't want to give away too much. But when certain drama is being played out, we tend to pick sides with a lot of stuff. So I'm wondering if certain bands were picked certain places more so because of what's been going on with them outside of music as opposed to their actual music. So
I'm kind. I guess if you to answer that question, probably L.A. Guns or Faster Pussycat, maybe based on other people's opinion. I could have seen them making it, but they didn't. And that's okay.
yeah, yeah. Um, love LA Guns. I mean, absolutely love them. I'm thrilled to hear that Jeremy's giving them a shot because of me talking them up.
Yeah, I love them.
So um, knowing how the list plays out, I do understand, but I do love them.
Yeah,
Uh,
that was the
yeah.
other funny thing in the conversation with my wife is she was telling me, "Well, score the bands that he's not going to put in the top 10. Score them higher just so they get it in." She's like, she's already, fixing the outcome. I was like, I can't do that. Come on, vote yourself.
Next time we're gonna have her vote as well.
Mhm.
So Tony is saying that he was surprised that Poison was so low.
Yeah,
Poison was at 18. Okay. Let's see here. All right, so let's attack the top 10 here. A band that isn't that listen, some people consider them from the hair / glam / pop metal era. They hate the term, but I think they get it. They understand. It's similar to what you were saying about Whitesnake, though. Although people may not associate them, they kind of came out in that same era or made it huge during that era. So that's why I think some people would consider them, part of this whole subgenre or whatever. But out of Sacramento, California,
Tesla.
Tesla. I knew Dan would know that. I was gonna say formerly known as City Kid, but then I was thinking, I'm like, fuck, were they City Kid or was that Extreme? I don't remember. It was one of the two. So, Tesla. Anyone want to say something about Tesla?
Well, I'll say that they weren't as big a band in the UK as they were in America, and I think that's still true today. They're not huge over here, but I did buy one or two albums by them, and I do like them. I think they're good. I don't think they've ever had the hits that some of the other bands have had, and that's probably one thing that makes me feel that they're not in the top 10 league for me. But you may disagree.
In the US, they had two massive hits. Love Song You Couldn't Get Away From Anywhere, to the point where I was trying out for cover bands and every cover band wanted to do that fucking song and I hated it. Their other big song is another song that I can't stand, which is a cover, the song Signs. I absolutely love their first four albums. Mechanical Resonance, Great Radio Controversy, to me is one of the greatest albums to be released in the 90s. Psychotic Supper and Bust a Nut.
Bust a Nut
Yeah.
has a surprising good songs on it.
Yeah, absolutely. You think that maybe they're done in it, and it sucks because they almost put out like the worst songs off of the album as singles, but you listen to what the hell's Invited is the first song, The Gate, Invited, then Solution and Shine Away. Songs like that are just great, and they're heavy and they've got great riffs and solos to them. And then they fell apart, and then they came back, put out one strong album, and after that, just hasn't been the same. So I couldn't vote them higher personally because of that. Johan was shaking his head. Tesla not big in Sweden?
No, no, absolutely no. No hit, no.
Okay.
Totally unknown. Not totally unknown, but
Right.
yeah,
Homework. Listen to at least Mechanical Resonance and Great Radio Controversy. Their first two albums.
hmm
And from that surprising album called Bust a Nut in 1994, the seventh song on it called Action Talks. Listen to how kick ass that is today. When I listen to that one, I usually have to listen to it again. It's heavy for in a way for Tesla. It's not like detuned or anything like that. It's got a good rhythm to it.
yeah.
Action Talk.
Hey, Dan, send me a whatever on Messenger to pick it up because
You got it.
I love to hear it.
Yeah. I think Tesla went the way of another band that I'm going to talk about shortly. Much like what Steve Clark meant to Def Leppard. Tommy Skeoch leaving Tesla had a lot to do with them losing their bite because he kind of brought that attitude and heaviness to the band. And then once he was gone, there have been glimpses, but they've had. I know Mike Jones likes Shock, but for a lot of us, that's Def Tesla. So
So since we're still on the Tesla, I can confirm that to me, I think the singer's name is Jeff, is
Yes.
one of the nicest human beings that I could ever have met. He is so down to earth and available. And then on the podcast, the bass player, he comes off as being non-inviting and not there, but that's just his personality. And he got to explain himself on a podcast of he has some issues that he deals with, and that's the why he is. So sometimes podcasts help explain things and let you know really more of what's going on. Otherwise, you just would see it as face value and just go, "That guy's just a dick." But there
Right.
can be a reason for it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so at number 9, I kind of let the cat out of the bag, and I will do the Metal Dan thing now. Def Leppard at number 9. This was when part of me faltering with today's show is that people started asking me, well, what about Def Leppard? What about Pyromania? What about Hysteria? What about, and I'm like, all right, sure, Def Leppard. They again became big during that same era, so I get why people would vote for them for this show. Actually, I didn't throw the graphic up. I wanted to. I couldn't find a good graphic that had Pete Willis in there. That's what I was looking for initially, but went with this. Def Leppard, what do you guys think? Should they be included on this list? Should they be this high? Should they be lower? Jeremy.
Well, I think they should be in the list. They contributed a lot of good hard rock and a lot of sort of American style heavy rock during that time as well. So you can understand it. I mean, they went out to America to try and sell themselves, and they became extremely popular. With a lot of great hits and a lot of great stuff. I mean, I personally prefer the High and Dry album than Pyromania and the one after that, which has just slipped my mind immediately. And after that, I think that they lost their way a lot, and they've become sort of like a pop band. They're producing, wishy-washy songs. I think the latest album's terrible. But at the time, they were a great band, and so why not? They should be on the list. They really kicked ass.
That's why they're doing that symphonic album for you, Jeremy. They're going to make it all up for you. Make it all up to you.
Yeah.
Johan, what do you think about Def Leppard? Should they be here?
uh, I didn't put them on my list, but I don't know. They are from England, and my I didn't think of them when I picked my list, but uh, Hysteria is probably the mm, it's a soundtrack of my youth. So mm, it's hard. I love Def Leppard. Uh, Not now, but uh, those no, I, no, not on this list. But for the record, I must say that Hysteria is the soundtrack of the 80s. It's a perfect album of the 80s. If you ask me tomorrow, I would say not that album, but yeah, but yeah, it's not on this list, but they made good music during that period. Sorry to be so, yeah.
No, that makes sense. Dan, what do you
The
think?
the sound, as Johan's saying, makes the list, but the band doesn't make the list. And for whatever this list is, that we had a hard time figuring out what this is.
Okay. Blame the host on that. At number 8, well, this band is, although the singer I think is originally from New York, they're definitely known as a California band, I would say. Although they've been known to be blind in the southern parts of the U.S. It is Wasp. So there you go. Dan was anticipating this. You felt that Wasp should be here all along. I take it.
I didn't have them on my list. I had a feeling that they would. Um, but yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is, this is colored vinyl, and I ordered it. I had my mom order it because back in the day you could only get it by mail order.
Right.
This single, "Fuck Like a Beast," and so my mom wrote a check, and it didn't come right away, so I had to track the person down. But go figure, so that she was willing to get me a "Fuck Like a Beast" album or single because this was huge, man. And I
Mm.
still have it. Mike Varney, the whole thing.
Did
Really
she
cool.
know? Did she know the title of the song?
Yeah, she didn't care. I don't know. I don't know why she let me do what I did.
See, now Wasp, I mean, to me, yeah, it makes sense that they're here, but at the same time, I'm also surprised that they were voted this high. Um, because I think they're a popular band. I think there's a lot of folklore surrounding them, but they never really had a huge hit. Kind of what Jeremy was saying about Tesla before, but I mean, was I Want to Be Somebody or 99 and Nasty or The Real Me or Blind in Texas or I'm trying to think what other quote unquote big songs they had. They never had a radio hit ever. They were
Hmm.
just always kind of a cult band that everyone loved, I think. And maybe this is a credit to the voters liking the heavier side of this kind of hard rock and metal that got them to 8. Um, Johan, I have to think that Wasp is huge in Sweden.
Yes, they were huge. Uh, During in the 80s, when they came here the first time, they were on national TV because they had the show were violent. They said,
Mhm.
and they said that Wasp. The name was "We Are Satan's People,"
Right.
and that became a huge thing here in Sweden, and that helped them a lot. So they became huge, of course. Uh, and then many years later, when they were not so big, perhaps in '98, they played here in my hometown
Oh wow.
at my work, at my club, and I cooked for them, and I met Blackie and Chris Holmes, and I talked to them a lot. No, not Chris Holmes. I don't. Chris Holmes. He put on a rubber, a hat with just for the eyes, just
Mhm.
the rubber, and he chased old people outside the yeah outside the club during the day. He was strange, but I mean that night I met many bands, but uh, Wasp were special, and especially Chris Holmes. That was something.
Yeah.
He did what he wanted to do, and yeah. To back to the point.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wasp first album is a masterpiece. 10 out of 10. It's that album is for me. Wow, what a great album! Absolutely.
Okay, and Tony in the chat is saying too wild for radio with a question mark. So he's asking. I don't think they were too wild for radio. I think a lot of it had to do with the labels they were on. Um, like Metal Dan said, they were with Mike Varney initially. Then they were on Capitol, I believe. And you have to think about the bands that Capitol had. They had Poison, which was huge. They had Megadeth as well. They had, other bands that were bigger names than Wasp. So I don't think that they got as big a promotion as those other bands. But they were always on big tours. They were opening for Judas Priest and for Iron Maiden and bands like that. So they were always like the support act to when some of these bigger bands were coming around. So it wasn't as if no one knew about them. It's just they weren't at the level of some of these other bands.
When I saw Maiden at in Gothenburg '86,
Mhm.
Wasp were opening up on the uh,
86 inside the Electric Circus, maybe.
yeah, they were almost as big as Maiden here in Sweden.
Yeah.
So that was the feeling. So I mean, Wasp were really big here. Yeah,
Like you both say, it wasn't like they had a huge hit, but they did have memorable songs, and they had a heck of a live stage show and presentation, and something with the how they grew up with the throwing out the meat, and they had a legendary cult status as well. And I love what Johan said, because they came off as a little dirty, like in the US we had the PMRC,
Yeah.
that just kicked them up even more. Thank you, you just elevated their status.
Yeah. Yep. Brian Slagle posted something about that the other day saying, "Thank you for making it easy for me to pick up albums." And they had the parental guidance sticker underneath that.
and
So
and I guess you still have that today in Spain. You talk. I didn't even know what that was. The Overkill has a rating or something on a number, and I didn't know what that was in the U.S. when I've gotten imports.
it depends. It's usually there if it has a DVD, because the DVDs need to have a rating, and it also sometimes it isn't even a rating. Sometimes it's just the country code, so to let you know if it'll play or not everywhere.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Because a lot of them have a zero, and that's just the it means that it'll play in every region.
Okay.
Yeah. Jeremy, anything about Wasp?
Yeah, they were really popular in the UK. I mean, they were on top of the pops during the 80s. And I remember the shock value of seeing them because, there was only a few bands that you would sort of look at and think, wow, the Twisted Sister. There was Ozzy Osbourne, there was Alice Cooper, and there was Wasp, and they had a few decent hits here. I mean, I think maybe 3 or 4 of the singles got in the top 30, which in those days, you would sell a lot of copies of singles to get in the top 30. I think the highest was Chainsaw Charlie, number
Oh wow.
17, 18 in the charts, so it got in the top 20. And they've just been on tour here at the moment, and everywhere is sold out. Every
Wow.
single show was sold out. I couldn't get a ticket. So they're still popular, and it's probably because they've got so many good songs. They might not all have been, big hits, but they're all
Right.
memorable songs, really, and everybody wants that bit of shock value.
Yeah, something else that I want to mention that I alluded to before, and you just mentioned Ozzy. I think that one thing that kind of surprised me is the fact that someone like Ozzy wasn't voted on here. Someone like Scorpions wasn't voted on here. Someone like Kiss wasn't voted on this list because I think all of them put out music that kind of fit into this. Shit, Judas Priest with Turbo. Heavily influenced. All the bands I just mentioned were heavily influenced by bands that were on this list, and some of them pivoted to try to stay relevant. I You could even stretch that and say ACDC's Fly on the Wall. You could stretch that and say Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time, who they changed their guitar sounds just to sound current with what these bands were doing at that time. Their guitar sound was closer to someone that's going to be further up on this list than their native sound. Dan, go ahead. You were going to say something.
Yeah, Wasp is about to do another run of shows here in the U.S. and with the Armored Saint opening up, going from east to west or whatever. And then I'm also curious. Chris Holmes is on the Monsters of Rock cruise in 2 days. He's recovered from cancer. I don't think he's the madman that he used to be with Johan. I saw Chris on his own being very nice at a club playing guitar, and he's an animal, but I don't think he's. So I'm curious what's going to happen on the cruise. He's probably alcohol free, even though it's very inviting on a boat. How he behaves himself, how he interacts with people, whether he does or doesn't, I'm curious to hear those stories.
Well, let's hope he's not a casualty on the boat, because that's so inviting to so many things, as you're saying, and a lot
Because
of them are probably not good for him.
they're going to have a pool there, and you know what he's known for. Is he going to be mocked or what? He can't go by the pool, right? I mean, that's just too funny from
Unless
that scene from.
they have floating chairs that are just like that one.
Can you imagine? It'd be funny. It'd be a hell of a picture.
At number 7, I just alluded to someone's brown sound. Van Halen at number 7. Now, I think a lot of people would say, "Oh no, they had nothing to do with Poison or these other bands," but I think it's impossible to talk about anything that's remotely influenced by the LA scene that doesn't take into consideration how huge Van Halen was to the LA scene and continues to be, and how many of these guitarists in a lot of these bands that we mentioned were influenced by Eddie Van Halen and his playing and his soloing, and how much of the over the top playing was involved with some of these people because of Eddie. So, Jeremy, Van Halen, should they be here?
Yeah, they should be. Dave Lee Roth is the ultimate frontman, and was at the time, and he stands up with all those sort of types of bands. Really, I think. Just not even talking about Eddie, but all the rest of the band. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they've got the songs, haven't they? They've got the albums. But there's not a lot you can say about Van Halen. I mean, we all know what a great band they were. they kept it going for quite a long time, really. Because I think even the 1984 album is brilliant as well. They went a little bit melodic, a little bit keyboardy. But the great thing about Van Halen is their songs that you can dance to. They're heavy metal songs that you can actually dance to. They've got so much vibe, so much groove. And there's a lot of groove in those sort of 80s bands, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, so in other words, Jeremy is admitting to dancing the night away with Van Halen. Johan Van Halen.
Uh, Sorry to say that that's a band for me to discover. I have, of course, I know all the classics, but I'm not. I can't. I'm not the right person to speak about Van Halen. So
Yeah, I didn't remember if you had said that if they were big or not in Sweden. I know that Van Halen, much like other bands, much like Rush, I was going to say, because Rush, I think, is big in Europe in certain countries, and in others they aren't. Van Halen is similar to them in that effect because they, after a certain time period, they didn't tour a lot in Europe because they didn't sell as many albums or weren't as big, and so they just stuck to a few countries, and that was it.
yeah,
So
no, so no, that's I like Van Halen, but no, I can't. Not my band.
okay,
Not yet, at least.
okay. Dan, anything to say about Van Halen?
Oh, they made my top 10, and I was figuring out a way to how to get them in. I looked at the list of saying it was supposed to be 80s, so I considered 80 through 89 to be what should make it, and I saw that trying to figure out what my favorite Van Halen record is a tough one all on its own. So, but those came out before 80. But then I looked said, well, Women and Children First came out in 1980, so that counts. So that got me to put them in the top 10. And Women and Children First, I think, is a harder record
Mhm.
than maybe one or two,
Right.
the first two. So yeah, so they go in there absolutely. That is the sound of Los Angeles, Hollywood, and summer.
Yeah. Absolutely. Number 6. I've been listening to certain songs by this band the last few weeks. They are formerly known as, and I'll say this and Dan will know instantly, Dante Fox, Great White. So, Dan, a band that's yet another one that's kind of local to you, right?
Oh, huge influence in growing up in my life. We used to listen to Great White all the time, and they used to play here, so we'd see them in clubs. And they too, they went from a small thing to a huge thing to being able to open up. I don't know if they headlined at arena, but they were at least on the big bills, and it was cool to see that our little band took off like they did. Huge influential. I played bass in a band growing up, and with a friend, we used to play the song "Hold On," which is a deep cut from
Yeah.
the first album,
Hmm.
and that was the first song we really learned to groove together. That he had the guitar and I had the bass, and you could blend the two together to make something. So there's that, and yeah, I would just see him at the smallest of clubs when they were kind of off tour because they'd play here. So I was very fortunate, and now I hear and I'm not there on the boat, but Great White's playing, and they have this new singer
Hmm.
that I think that Jack should be in the band, but that's not my fight. But I hear this new guy sounds pretty good, so
Yeah.
go figure. I'm missing probably a pretty cool experience that they're reinvigorated again with a youth of a singer, which is what they need.
Yeah. I think his name is Brandon Carlisle, if I'm not mistaken. Um, why they didn't try to find a singer that sounded remotely like Jack to begin with is beyond me because Jack is such an important part to that, and that's no disrespect to Terry or Mr. Polygrip, but yeah, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, Journey's your perfect example. where they've kept everything rolling because of Arnell. And, I don't know. You could look at Maiden, you can look at Priest, you can look at even Motley Crue, bands where it's worked, bands where it hasn't worked. And with Great White, it definitely did not work. Jeremy, anything to say about Great White?
Not a great deal. I mean, they certainly made no impression whatsoever in the UK. I mean, I probably think there's about 3, maybe 4 people have ever heard of them in the entire United Kingdom. Seriously, if you talk to any metal fan, they would not be in the first 1,000 bands that you would mention. They just never had a hit here. They never, as far as I know, they never toured here. I've not listened to hardly any of their stuff, but I have heard, obviously, Once Bitten, Twice Shy. Don't have a lot to say about them because I don't really like them. I don't think that they're particularly very good. Sorry.
Gut shot by Jeremy. All right. So I will say this. As much as I love Great White, I think their biggest problem was, and you just mentioned it, is that they got huge on a cover song. And unfortunately, for a while there, they were trying to find the next Once Bitten, Twice Shy on every album. And it was like, another song that sounds like this? You guys can do better than this. If you listen to Stick It, which Metal Dan was just referring to, the song Hold On off of that. If you listen to Stick It is a great album. Face Today has its moments. I think Once Bitten is fucking fantastic, beginning to end. I think that's a great album. I think that kind of tied the songwriting with a bigger, more polished sound. And that's not to say that I don't like stuff that they did after that, because Psycho Motel has a lot of good stuff on it. Back to the Rhythm has good stuff on it. So to me, they've released good material over the years. It's just that I think, in my opinion, they became the classic band that had that radio hit and chased that radio hit for too long, where instead of trying to go after their core audience, they were kind of looking to expand continuously, and they just did it for too long. Just my opinion. Johan, Great White, any sort of impact in Sweden?
No, none whatsoever.
Okay.
They're an American band. It's just, for local radio here, they would be played often.
Yeah, and even not local radio in the New York area. You had the cover Once Bitten, Twice Shy on the radio every day.
Oh, yeah.
You had Rock Me every day on the radio as well. I'm trying to think. Save Your Love from time to time would make it on the radio.
Yeah. They had a ballad at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what sucks, because I think Save Your Love was, and I'm not a ballad guy, but I think that that's a fucking fantastic ballad. I mean, because it's more than just your typical, cliche formulaic ballad, in my opinion. But all right. So Tony is also mentioning that Accept doing the same thing with Mark Tornillo, Mark Screw, which is what it translates into Spanish. All right. At number 4, or at number 5, excuse me, I almost jumped over this band. Love them, hate them, think that they were dangerous, the most dangerous band in the world at one time, most overrated band for some people. Many members, then they kind of steered the ship again. Any guesses who you guys think I'm talking about?
No,
not yet.
Guns N' Roses at number 5. I've always enjoyed this band even before they were huge. Was lucky to catch on, I don't know, 8 months, maybe a year before Sweet Child of Mine became big, and I remember letting a friend borrow the import single of Number of the Beast. And I said, okay, you have that Guns N' Roses album, right? Because Eddie Trunk played this song called Night Train the other day on the radio. And that sounded really cool. So I want to hear the rest of that album. And since day one, Sweet Child of Mine was always a skipper on that one. But I've always loved the rest of the album for the most part. Appetite for Destruction alone, I think. There you go, original cover. Shit, I have the single for Don't Cry, which has not the same cover, but something by the same artist, I believe. Anyway, I don't think anyone's going to say that Guns N' Roses wasn't big in their country. Jeremy?
No, I'm not going to say that. They were absolutely amazing. I mean, I went round to a friend's house. He said to me, "Come round. I've got this album by this new band called Guns N' Roses." So he puts it on, and he plays "Welcome to the Jungle," and we just look at each other, and we were absolutely speechless. We'd never heard a new band as good as this. And then he kept playing it, and he said, "Listen to this one called Night Train. Listen to this one called Mr. Brownstone." And then obviously it finishes off with Rocket Queen. And I was just gobsmacked by the talent and the heaviness and the sleaziness and the fact that he's written these great songs, but then you could hear these great solos. Who's this guitar player? One thing about Guns N' Roses you might say is that they never really brought out enough great albums, after this. They brought out some great songs, but they never really sort of hit that peak, but they didn't need to. I mean, if every band out there just produces one great album, they'll go into history. And we know the talent that's in the band. They're all talented. Slash in particular has got to be one of the greatest guitar heroes. You might not like some of the stuff that he puts out now, but then he was just amazing. Some people find it difficult to even play some of the stuff that he does, and they're just one off.
Johan, Guns N' Roses has to be huge in Sweden.
Of course. Not for me though. I when they became famous, I was too much into Metallica and Anthrax and Megadeth, and that type of music were not for me. So, and still aren't. I'm not the biggest GNR fan. Perhaps I'm the smallest. Not my band. They're good, but they have made some great songs. But they were not something for me, and they are still not. So, that record just no. Yeah, you know what I mean. It's,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. That's why we do these lists, and to get various opinions and get people to just talk about different bands, whether we love them or hate them. I think everyone's opinion is just as important. So,
this is Dan, when it comes to perfect albums and albums that I've probably heard the most times, it's either going to be Queen, News of the World on headphones, or it's going to be this album, GNR. And it's because, Appetite, it's because of the mix. And it's the way that those levels, and you put that on headphones and you crank it up loud, it makes me happy. But it's the way that you're left and right in that the way that got recorded and you hear the guitar slash back and forth, or to use slash as a slash, but the way the mix is brilliant, and it's a perfect album. It's probably my number one album of all time, which is hard to put a list on.
There you go.
It makes me happy every time I hear. I start getting into that after Sweet Child, and it just goes off. It's like it's just too bad that there wasn't more. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, there's like 5 million songs locked in a vault somewhere, but whether we get any more, we'll see.
They somebody just said that you're gonna read the news for me. I don't have to, but there's some blurb about Van Halen. Somebody admitting that there's a big back catalog somewhere. You'll tell me more in an upcoming episode on Patreon.
Yeah. Well, there's 5150 Studios is just full of tapes, but we'll see. Number 4. This band was number 1 for a good part of the tallying, and then they didn't become number 1 all of a sudden. Um, Initially, I was surprised, but then I wasn't really surprised because they are still all over the radio. One of their songs was, I think, for 1983, was the most voted on song out of any. So, at number 4,
Mental health.
what's that, Dan?
Quiet Riot. Is it gonna be Quiet Riot? Oh, it's Rat.
It's Rat from San
Rats.
Diego, Mickey Rat. Um, whenever I think about danceable music, which Jeremy mentioned before, Rat a lot of times comes to mind just because to me they were different than any of these other bands. That's what was kind of cool and is cool of this list. I mean, if you really look at the top 10, what we've discussed so far, none of these bands really sound alike. They're all different. And even throughout all 42 bands, yeah, there are some that maybe have copied here and there because some of these top 10 bands are just so huge that others followed suit. But I think Rat kind of did their own thing. And it's funny because Mark has been posting a lot about invasion of your privacy lately and discussing how big and how great these first 2 albums were. I personally got Invasion first because the public library had it on vinyl. So I took it out, brought it home, recorded it on cassette, skips and all, and loved it from the first time I listened to it, and obviously went back afterwards. But there's just something about those first 2 Rat albums, the guitar sound, the soloing. It was the perfect combination of everything there. And much like I mentioned about Tommy Skeoch with Tesla and Steve Clark with Def Leppard, as much as I love what they did on Infestation, them missing Robin Crosby has meant that the band has fallen apart. Songs were nowhere near as good either. So, anyway, Rat, who wants to talk about them? Jeremy, you're shaking your head. Yes.
I was really into Rat. I bought the first few albums by them. I found they had their own unique style, and obviously the singing. I still, even today, can't decide whether I like it or I don't. It's one of those love-hate sort of things, and I'm not entirely certain. But having said that, I love the music and I love the hits that they came out with, and they were popular in a film. I think I went to the pictures to watch a film, and I remember Rat being the soundtrack to the film, and that kind of got me into them even more. And today, I listen back to some of that stuff, and I think it's worn very well. I think it sounds well produced, well mixed, and you turn it up loud, and it gives you that sort of feel of that time. And they had a lot about them, and as you say, a lot of these bands have a unique sound, and Rat certainly had it.
Yeah, Dan, your thoughts on Rat?
Yeah, Rat with the unique sound. So they just released, and Steven talks about it now, that they're releasing a new box set of everything and throwing in some cool stuff and all that. And then later he's going to re-release the EP, which the EP is gold. It's so raw and has different versions of songs. So he says he's only going to put that out on album, no CD, no download.
Oh wow!
So that's interesting. My buddy had that one from back in the day with Tawny Kitane's legs on the cover, and I
Yep.
really still want to get that from my friend. I don't think I'm ever going to pull it from him. So it's unique sound, like Jeremy said.
Mm.
Yeah, that's something we discussed on one of the previous Patreon shows, how parts of their catalog are missing from streaming. And it sucks because some of the songs off of the EP, Tell the World, Lack of Communication, they're nowhere to be found on streaming. So if you want to hear them, you got to make sure you upload them from your old CDs, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
So as Steven says, that new EP should be coming out this year in a re-release.
Cool.
Finally.
Johan, was Rat ever popular in Sweden?
Yeah, I think they were, but I don't know if they ever visited us. But the album "Invasion of Your Privacy" is, for me, it's one of the best albums ever made.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I,
we actually talked about this long time ago. We talked about a song that Ishan recorded called Until I To Disappear, I believe. And the intro to the song is so Rat. It sounds, like a classic Rat riff. And it's funny because I believe you mentioned to me, because I didn't understand what he was saying in a clip, and he says, "Oh, this was an '80s riff," and I didn't understand what he was saying. And I believe you were the one that explained it to me, Johan. But there's other groups too, other heavier bands that I think that they're playing is very much influenced by Warren and by Robin, because they had a certain something to what they were doing. Their riffing was different to other bands. It was, it wasn't the same old. And sorry, Slayer fans, sorry, Megadeth fans, but the King V was designed for Robin King Crosby of Rat. So for all these purists that want to shit on this style of hard rock or metal, just know that some of your more iconic guitar models that your players are using, Marty Friedman with the old Kelly guitar, again, these were all made for bands that were in this style of hard rock.
mm.
So, number 3, a band that I've always loved, and it's funny because I don't really care for their debut album, but also it didn't have all the players involved, all the classic lineup. It did, however, have a member of Rat on that first album. Dan, can you guess?
No, not yet. Yeah. Motley Crue, I think. It's Dokken.
Juan was on the first Dokken album until Jeff came along. And man, I think that Tooth and Nail, Under Lock and Key was maybe a step down from that. But again, Back for the Attack was, I think, strong. I think those 3 albums are great and kind of cemented a lot of people's love for this band. Again, George Lynch, monster player. They were doing different things where it's funny. Today I had a random playlist on playing a lot of the music from bands that we're talking about, and Mr. Scary comes on, and I was just thinking, shit, I think a lot of younger players probably don't get the impact of what George had done at the time with that song. Um, I think that his playing, again, there were so many players at that time that were important. I mentioned Warren DeMartini. We've talked about Vivian Campbell a lot in the past. George Lynch, Randy Rhoads, Eddie Van Halen. I think if you really look back, these guys really helped evolve what a lot of metal players played on after. You know, whether people want to admit it or not, George is such a fucking monster player. And just how they put some of those songs together is just beyond great to me. Um, Johan Dokken.
Yeah, I saw them opening up for ACDC at 1990, around, the Thunderstruck tour.
Okay.
Uh, Great band. No, Blow Up Your Video. It was Blow Up Your Video tour. They opened up, and they were great. And I remember hearing Tooth and Nail on Swedish radio,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was, wow, this is so fresh and so new and so American heavy metal.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Dokken, and especially those three albums that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great band. I wish that Don Dokken had a good, taste to go into. He still comes around here and plays, and it doesn't sound that great, but
Yeah.
yeah, but those back in the day, wow, what a great albums he made. I really must say, yeah.
Absolutely. Dan, how about for you?
Bob Nalbandian would have Don Dokken on graciously all the time in all of his uh, movies that he made. So he had a good connection for that. I think that's really great. They didn't make my top 10. Yeah, the first, two or three albums are great. I played the heck out of them, but that sound didn't age for me. And I just don't go back to it much anymore.
Okay. Jeremy?
Yeah, I really liked Dokken at the time. I still like them. To me, they had their own sort of distinctive style. Again, we just talked about Rat. There was something about the keys that he was playing in, the way he played, that was very, very different to some of the other guitarists around. And then on top of that, they also had some very good songs as well. There's good songwriting, and they were songs that the very commercial songs, but also some that weren't so commercial, but they were very listenable. And so putting all that together, they was a band that sort of rose above some of the others at the time, and you found them quite interesting to listen to. So again, I agree with Dan. It was the first three albums that really hit home, and yeah, they made a bit of a splash in the UK, I think, at the time.
So they've always talked about the fact that they had the same management as Metallica, and that their management told them that they didn't need to dress up like other bands, that had they have just gone out with jeans and t-shirts and played, that it would help the longevity of their career. Do you guys think that the image is what held them back from getting to the next level? Or do you guys think it was something different?
It was something different. I don't think it was the image. I think it was the infighting, and
Yeah.
they just blew themselves up.
Mm.
Somebody else?
Yeah, I didn't really think about the image of them at the time. I think they just had that usual hair metal image, and that was fine. I was really listening to the music anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think the infighting is what did them in. Absolutely. All right. At number 2, and I will say this: 2, 3, and 4 are separated by very few points. So a lot of people voted for them. At number 2, trying to think. Oh, okay. I looked at this before. Probably the band with the most amount of members that are no longer here with us anymore. Quite right.
Ah.
We want to go back to the the origins. Randy's gone, and Kevin, and within the last few years, we also have Frankie, who's no longer here. This is interesting to me. I love that they're at number 2. I love that they made the list because I've always been a fan of everything up until Guilty Pleasure. After that, can't say much about it. Not because I haven't listened, but just not really into it. And I have to say that I think the secret weapon was Carlos, because once Carlos was gone, the songs were kind of gone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The first two albums, the Japanese releases
Yeah.
with Randy, they're kind of cool. They're dated. They have some songs and whatnot that And then once Carlos comes in, the band really starts to take off, and then he kind of loses interest for whatever reason. Wants no part of it, and probably has a lot to do with that sound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that is my number 2 pick. So I got one.
There you go. The other thing too, which a lot of people, I think, and this is something that Gene Hoglan 100% agreed with me about, is that this was the first hard rocker metal #1 album in the US. This really helped kick down the doors for a lot of these bands, and it's well documented. Had Kevin have known to play nice with the press, the band would have probably been huge, but he kind of couldn't help himself.
He admitted to it too late in his life that it was him that and his ego. Him and Dee Snyder from Twisted Sister admit the same thing.
Yeah,
They egos got to them.
right. Jeremy, were they big in the UK?
They kind of were on the periphery a little bit. I mean, they came out with a few singles, as we know. Metal Health was, fairly big. The Slade covers, were quite big, and they were very well done. But you have to bear in mind that they were covering a 70s icon band here in the UK, and we sort of saw them as a little bit lacking substance. Apart from those hit singles, there wasn't really much to Quiet Riot, and I don't think they really sort of resonated beyond as other bands did. We've just talked about. We just talked about Dokken, and we talked about Rat, and those sort of bands had something to them, and Quite Right to me never really lived up to the same billing, really, and I think that's how they were perceived here.
So let me ask you this: did that have to do with them covering a huge song? Had they have not covered "Come On, Feel the Noise," is it possible that maybe they would have been accepted in a different fashion? Maybe, did they cover a song that was too sacrilegious for the crowd in the UK, that somebody, first of all, it's an American band covering a UK band, a band that was so huge in the UK as well, that for a lot of people that was insulting?
It wasn't so much that it was insulting. It was you're kind of right in some aspect to that, but I think what it was that they did a cover of a song, and it seemed to be their best song. So it was kind of, we saw through it. We kind of thought, well, if that's their best song, what else have they got to offer us? It's not their song. It's done very well, and it's a great song. But then we think, oh, it's a great song because it's a Slade song. And so, and then you look at the rest of what they've got to offer, and you think, well, there's nothing to match it. And I think that's what happened, really. I think if they hadn't have covered it and just come out with a few hits of their own, then maybe we would have, talked about them in a different light.
Yeah, Metal Health was a huge song in the US, actually. So, and I do think that as big of a hit as "Come On Feel the Noises," I mean, I'd be quite honest, if I never hear that again, I would have no problem. But there's a lot of that first album that I love. Hey, Quiet Ride is the first thing that I bought that wasn't Kiss as a kid. So that album to me means a lot. And even though I just said that about Come On Feel the Noise, we were at a basketball tournament a few weeks ago. All of a sudden I hear the song Come On, and all the hair on my arm starts to stand up on end. I'm like, holy shit, as much as I don't really care for this song at this point in time. This is cool that they're playing this, even though, they played that Enter Sandman, and I forget Thunderstruck was the other one. Okay, I've heard these a million times, but it's still cool that mixed in with all the modern pop music that's being played, we're getting some of this stuff. So it was cool for me. Johan, Quiet Ride in Sweden.
No, as Jeremy said, there were no, not big bad, but now I mean, I can really enjoy the first three records, especially the third. It's a hidden treasure for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
QR3. Okay.
Yeah. Good record. It's very slick, very American, but
yeah,
very typical of the time. So, yeah, good one.
Okay.
In my opinion, Quiet Riot helped introduce Slade to the U.S. Before that, I don't think we really knew who they were, and now I still appreciate them even in 2023. And is it Naughty is the singer? He's still alive yet. Well, he's probably, I don't know. It's too bad he can't still do something, because I'd still like to see Slade. And there's a band that I guess they're not going to resurrect just by name. I think the name still has a value, but I think they're forever connected, Slade and Quiet Riot, mostly because of Kevin's vocals. When you listen to Slade, you know exactly who he's ripping off in a way. His influence. Nothing wrong with it. It worked, and I thank God for Slade and Naughty.
Well, right after that became huge, remember that I don't know the name of the Slade album, but the song Run Runaway was all over the radio in the US. And a lot of it had to do with Quiet Riot covering their stuff.
Yeah, they're kind of like Sweet. They just destroyed themselves from within too, and couldn't keep it together. But yeah, they could have taken off. That song was huge, and it's just a shame. And that guy Naughty seems like he was a talent, but he was before my time. So I really have a hard time speaking about it, other than just still appreciating their music now.
Yeah. All right, so let's recap the top 10 up till now real quickly. Here at 10, Tesla. At 9, Def Leppard. 8, Wasp. 7, Van Halen. 6, Great White. 5, Guns N' Roses. 4, Rat. 3, Dokken. 2, Quiet Riot. And a number 1.
Oh yeah,
who's missing?
the Crew.
Oh, there you go. Jeremy was not fun tonight. He came prepared. I knew the second. I'm like, wait a second. Jeremy's wearing nothing visible of a band. There's some sort of a surprise here. At number 1, by a lot, Motley Crue. I think every list, I think maybe there was one list that didn't have Motley Crue. Shout at the Devil was mentioned the most, then Too Fast for Love, and then Theater of Pain. So, Jeremy, since you're wearing the shirt.
Yeah, I mean, no band on this list apart from Crew epitomizes this era more. I mean, they were They did everything to excess. They looked the part. I've never been to Los Angeles. I've never been to the West Coast of America, but I have with Motley Crue. I mean, Motley Crue introduced me to the Troubadour, to Whiskey a Go Go. They introduced me to Sunset Strip, and I know all about these places only through Motley Crue. And their music was just fantastic at the time, and I still like a lot of it. Not all of it. Theatre of Pain was the album that got me into them because it was huge over here. I mean, they became a massive band over in the UK, and for a band from America, to make it so big over here, it's saying something. I don't know where their singles ended up, but I'm sure that a few of them were in the top 10. And they were, you wouldn't say they were the most talented
Right.
artists. They didn't have the most talented band members. You would say Guns N' Roses certainly had better talented musicians, but they just came up with the songs that was just epitomized that sort of stuff that the sleazy rock, glam rock era. And it was just fun. It was just fun, and you wouldn't get away with it today. It would be cancelled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say the only reason that I am not wearing a Motley Crue t-shirt is because they're in bins in the attic. They've been retired before they wear out any more than they already have. Johan, Motley Crue had to be huge in Sweden.
Oh yeah, they were huge, and Jeremy said everything perfect. But I mean, they were the number one band, 84, 85, 86. Motley Crue set the standard. So yeah, I love every record from those days. The first three is, I mean, wow. So yeah, no, it's the best. That's the soundtrack of the scene.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Dan, you were out there on the West Coast. What does Motley Crue mean to you?
It means a lot. The first couple of albums, there's a debate of who's better, Motley Crue or Rap, but that's for another time. But uh, my buddy had the original leather record, so he was low on cash, and he sold that to a record store uh, there in Hollywood. He sold it for $20, and even at the time, I thought, why I would have given you $20. Damn it! So went right through my hands, but a huge influence out here for California, and it was a surreal moment driving home from a club one night, driving down Sunset Strip, and Girls, Girls, Girls comes on. And just as we get to, I forget the name of the club, it mentioned in the song, it was right there. It was like, really? That was magic. It matched up. I kind of laughed at that, like, oh, Seventh Veil. There's the Seventh Veil. It was funny. So the wife and I laughed about that. Uh, but yeah, the first album we wore out like crazy. And then when they got into the more heavier satanic, they got a little bit darker. We still liked them, but it was that first "Take Me to the Top" and all that stuff was great.
Yeah, for me, seeing the Look That Kill video on MTV, like, wait, wow, they're wearing makeup like Kiss. It sounds heavy like Creatures of the Night. I need to check this out. And I got Theater of Pain first. I got that when it first came out, and then I went back and got Shout at the Devil and Too Fast for Love. To me, those first three albums are so special and cemented them with what they've done. I don't think that they've had good songs after that, but I don't think any album has really come close to being, for me, as special as those first three. I really like the album with Karabi. I don't like Girls, Girls, Girls or Dr. Feelgood. I just think that those are subpar to what those first three albums were, because I think those first three albums were game changers. And I think Girls, Girls, Girls and Dr. Feelgood was them chasing their own tail, kind of. Was, okay, we're gonna release what we think people want to hear from us, because this is what other people are playing that kind of sounds like us. I think they stopped being, leaders of the pack and just kind of started following the trends to an extent. So, and they've always done that, because I think if you look at what they've done after that, I mean, every album was them trying to sound like one band, another band, this, that, all the way up to Saints of Los Angeles, which is them catering to younger, radio friendly rock at the time. The Papa Roaches and the Trapped and all the other bands that their management had. It seems as if, again, they're trying to chase hits, but those first three albums were earth movers, earth shakers.
This must be why I listen to you, because you're preaching the truth and I agree with everything you say. You're nailing it. They were the leader before and then they started following. You're so right. That summarizes so well. I remember when Shout Out the Devil came out, it was, you're waiting for release day and you hear that intro with not using music right away. You're like, oh, this is something different. This is on the Kiss level.
Yeah.
This is something that we've never heard done before. It was amazing, and it still holds up today.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds great. For as much as they bitch about Tom Werman on that album, he knew what to get out of them. That album, beginning to end, to me, and I can say this about Too Fast for Love as well, and Theater of Pain. I don't think any one of those three albums has a bad song on it. So, Motley Crue is at the top of our list with reason. For a little bit there, Rat was in the lead. For a little bit, Quiet Riot was in the lead. And the closer I got to the end of tallying, it was like, okay, number one on this list, number one on that list, number one. They ended up at one or two on so many lists. So it just propelled them, so much further. Just so you guys understand, there's a 24-point difference between 1 and 2. There's a 5-point difference between 2 and 3. So
that's close.
That's huge when we do these lists. So awesome. I want to thank Metal Dan, Johan, and Jeremy for being here. Metal Dan is still promoting Leatherwolf, who was that you listed that as 11. Yeah, that was his Spinal Tap pick.
I so wanted to get him in there. You guys have no idea. Again, watching these bands come up through Los Angeles, they were right there, and but you got to go back to the first one. I was trying to figure out which one to put on there because I thought we were doing album lists, and I couldn't do it. But then I go the EP, but nobody's going to pick the EP, so I know that it would have been 60. So I didn't bother. But damn it, I'm going to want to go put it on the record player right now.
See that? We're going to have to do Underground California with Metal Dan one day.
They are playing under a new band now called Hail Mary because they have problems getting along. So only the drummer wants to be Leatherwolf. But they just played Germany, and Hail Mary with Michael Oliveri, which is an amazing favorite singer. They do all Leatherwolf songs, and they still do Spider, and they still do Endangered Species. It's like it still holds up. It's still good. You have no idea.
Cool.
I'm gonna listen to that now.
Look at that.
This is the EP. It's hard to find, so if you can,
is it on Spotify? I'll try.
It's on Apple for the live. The songs are at least there, but I don't think it's on Spotify. But you can look. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. I want to thank you guys once again. I want to thank anyone who's watching this live. We had Tony in the chat. We had Jose in the chat. Anyone who listens back to this, thank you for listening. And let us know if your list matches up, who we were missing, who should be higher, who should be lower, so on and so forth. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time right here on Signals from Mars. See ya.
Thank you for watching the Signals from Mars live stream. You can watch the show live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, or check out replays on YouTube. Go to signalsfrommars.com for more information. This concludes our show.